That's the biggest thing about Randy is everybody can go on and on about, oh, he was such a great guitar player and he was so humble and all that. But no, it went much deeper than that. He was an amazing human being, if he even was a human being. I have many doubts about that, quite honestly.
Thank you so much for joining us at Sense Music Media, Kelly. We are here to talk about some pretty cool things, or a pretty cool thing that's going to be bringing you to Australia at the end of the year.
Extremely cool things. If you're a Randy Rhoads fan or a fan of older Quiet Riot, I'm bringing it. That's what my show is all about. My show is about, you know, being there for the fans. I know that there are so many Randy Rhoads fans in Australia. I have a ton of friends over there, and I better see you people at my shows. And that's what it's all about. It's celebrating his life, celebrating his talent. And I'm going to be doing some things in Australia that I can only do in Australia that are going to be unbelievably cool. And anything you ever wanted to know about Randy, it's going to be there for you.
In regards to, yeah, Randy's life and how he had such an, well, anything you say is going to seem like almost an understatement, but, a massive impact on, so many genres of music, rock, glam, metal itself. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about how when Randy came into your life.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we were the kids who met in school and became best friends. That's basically us. We were thrust into a new school with older students, and we were the new guys, and we were both outcasts. We were both loners. We didn't fit in, and we were both scared to death. And so I noticed Randy walking around, and I said, there's something about that guy. He's different. He's not like everybody else around here. He really, literally seemed to have like a glow around him when he walked. And I'd see him on his way here, on the way to another class or to the cafeteria or something, and I would say, man, I really want to know this guy. I, I got to see what he's all about. And so I, I kind of went out of my way one day to sit down and have lunch with him. And he was sitting by himself. So I went over and sat down next to him and struck up a conversation. And he turned out to be just an amazing person just right off the bat. That's the biggest thing about Randy is everybody can go on and on about, oh, he was such a great guitar player and he was so humble and all that. But no, it went much deeper than that. He was an amazing human being, if he even was a human being. I have many doubts about that, quite honestly, because they just don't make people like Randy anymore. And so we quickly became good friends. I went over to his house. I learned immediately because the second we walked into his house, he said, yeah, I play guitar. And he went and got his guitar and just started playing. If he didn't have a guitar in his hands, he wasn't Randy, according to him. So um, I had had a little bit of interest in music. And of course, I wanted to do what my new best friend did. I wanted to play music. And I told him, I said, I want to play something. And he said, well, what do you want to play? And I said, I want to play keyboards. And he goes, no, no, you don't want to play keyboards. They're big, they're heavy, they're super expensive. And I went, oh, well, okay. I'm 11 years old. So that made perfect sense to me, expensive and heavy. And so he says, you should play bass. And I said, okay. I wasn't really sure what bass was, to be honest, but he showed me, and he had an old guitar in his house that sat in the Rhoads house. That was just sort of a hey, pick me up guitar. Anybody that came to the house, if they played, they would pick it up and play it. 1935, I believe, Gibson guitar, Army Navy Special. It belonged to his grandfather. And he started teaching me how to play bass on the first four strings of that guitar. Down the road, an opportunity arose to where we were actually able to acquire me a bass by means of performing a theft. And so we stole my first bass. And so now I had a bass. It was an innocent theft. That's all detail when I get over there in the Q&A that we're going to have. There's actually a couple funny stories involved with it. But now that I had a bass, we were really moving. The next thing that happened was his brother asked us if we'd like to go to a concert, and we had never been to a concert, a rock concert. And we said, yeah, who? And he said, Alice Cooper. And we went, who's she? And he goes, no, Alice Cooper's a guy. And we went, because nobody did that back then. And we're like, okay, uh, what's the deal on that? Oh, he's really cool. And he showed us the Love It to Death album. And we looked at that band and we went, holy crap. Look at these guys. This is unbelievable. We had never seen anything like it. So we go to the concert. Black Oak, Arkansas is the opening band, whom we had never heard of. And they were so damn good. We were like, oh, we don't even care about Alice Cooper anymore. We want to grow up, but we want to be Black Oak, Arkansas. We're going to start dressing like them. We're going to start looking like them. And then Alice Cooper came on, and then it was like, what the hell? And that was it. It was like an injection of pure addiction because everything we did was to be a cross between Alice Cooper and Black Oak, Arkansas. And we started to dress like that. We grew our hair out. We even went to as far as making our own clothes that we bought in thrift shops, mostly in the women's department.
So it's almost like you had the blueprint laid out in
Yeah,
front of you from just going to that one first
we
show.
we did, and we looked at that show and we said that that is going to be us. We are going to be rock stars, and nothing in the world is going to stop us. Nothing. And that was it. We stopped going to school, which caused a few feathers to be ruffled here and there. But for the most part, our parents were understanding, and even the schools, because really, when we went to school, we dressed like we were rock stars, and we literally got chased and beat up and threatened to get pants and all this sort of stuff, that happens to a different kid in a school system, particularly here. But that didn't stop us, not at all. We said, no, 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 no. We know what we're doing. We know what we want to be and who we want to be.
When did you first notice the polka dots coming into it? Then was that like an inspiration just by a bit of material that was found when you guys were making your own clothes?
Well, that's a major fast forward, but that's okay because we want to move this story along. But the polka dots came about when we had Quiet Riot, we had formed Quiet Riot, and we were now on our second management. And which is, Randy and I really liked our first management. He just wasn't a real manager. But now we had these new guys, and they had offices in Beverly Hills with floor to ceiling windows that looked all out over Beverly Hills, and there was a lot of money involved here. And as very, very young kids, that had a tremendous amount of influence on us. And while Randy and I had our own vision of who we wanted to be, these guys had different ideas. And pretty soon, the next thing we know, they're saying, well, you guys need an image. You got to look like something, which made sense to us. I mean, because look at those guys in Alice Cooper. Look at how they look. Even Black Oak, Arkansas, they had a look. And so we had to have a whole new look according to them. And at that point we became kind of a little bit like little mini robots because everything these guys said we did, and they said, "Here's what you're going to do. You guys are going to be the next Bay City Rollers." And we're like, "Oh, really? All right, you say so." But you're going to be a little bit different, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and you're going to be these naughty little kids, and you're going to have these flashy outfits. And it was during the development of that image that polka dots came about. There was also something about Nick Ronson that Randy had noticed, because when it came time to pick out the outfits or what we had to be like little characters, and they asked us, you know, what do you want to be, you know, and Randy said, well, I'd like to look a little bit like Mick Ronson. And Mick Ronson had some polka dots that he had worn in the, you can see them very clearly in the Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust video that's out there. And so Randy got the polka dots from there. And the next thing I know, I'm wearing a sailor suit. Don't ask me why, because it sure wasn't my idea. And then there's a bunch of stripes and all this stuff going on. And we had this image, and we're buying into it. We're little kids. These guys got, they're big millionaires. They got mansions in Bel Air, all this stuff. And of course, we're believing every word they said. So sure, we'll do whatever you want. And years later, I reflect back on it. I say, it's too bad we really didn't have minds of our own, because we really didn't, because we were too young.
So they pitched to you being the next Bay City Rollers, but then it sounds like you're
Uh,
going more down the track of the Village People.
there you go. Yeah, I mean, I would have much rather been a cowboy than a sailor. But uh, yeah, and that's when, at that time too, they also said, well, your music, a little bit too hard, a little rough around the edges. And we're like, well, that's what we like to play. And they're like, no, no, no. You got to sound like this. And so that's how our first two albums came to be, with the Japanese record release, where we were pushed to do it in a more poppy vein. Uh, the whole time being told, oh, you guys are going to be huge rock stars. You're going to have, you know, girls tearing your clothes off and things, and crowds waiting for you at the airport, all this stuff. And of course we're buying into it, so we took their advice, and we changed the way we played music, which is sad. And there's at least one song. Let me see if I think there was two. Yeah, one song for sure that me and Randy wrote before Quiet Riot was even formed, Force of Habit. That was more like what we wanted to sound like. And I'll be doing that there, when I get to Australia, as part of the set I'm doing, which is going to be a lot different than what people think. Um, I'm telling the guitar players on this stuff, we need to give this music some balls. So play what Randy played, but play it like Dimebag would play it. Play it like Zach would play it. Put your own spin on it. Give this shit some balls. And that's what we're going to get when I come to Australia.
That sounds good to me. I always like turning that distortion up just that little bit more if you can get away with it.
Yeah, yeah, we were kind of discouraged from doing that.
Yeah, so why I guess segued over to asking about the polka dots, was because, as you said, you went to your first live concert. It was transformative. You
Oh,
saw these
totally.
amazing acts. You immediately, wanted to
Yeah,
be part of that yourself, feel it, emulate it,
yeah,
and then you go on
yeah,
to playing in this band. The polka dot look comes out, and next thing you know, you've got fans showing up also wearing polka dots. So you're immediately having the same effect on other people. That would have been quite surreal.
yeah. Thank you for using the word effect, because that was the one I was trying to think of to answer this. But yeah, it also had an effect on us, because we said, well, I don't know, sailor suit, polka dots. people like this. Okay, great. Those guys were right. And that's what we're thinking. And not completely understanding that it certainly wouldn't um, stand the test of time. Uh, Quiet Riot 2, released out of Japan, is a perfect example of that. If you look at that album cover, it is absolutely laughable. And I am so glad to say that although I played the album, I didn't have to be pictured on it because it's ridiculous. And I'm glad I wasn't a part of that whole deal.
Yeah, when I found out I was going to get the chance to interview, obviously you start diving down as many little rabbit holes as you can, and
Right.
going and listening to the two albums that you were on was obviously top priority there. And even in this day of ready accessibility and the streaming platforms and everything, finding those first two albums was still quite a bit of a challenge. I think just quietly ended up watching YouTube rips of them to check them out.
Yeah, yeah. If in these times, if a bunch of Japanese girls or Korean girls came out and dressed like us and played that kind of music, everybody would think it was great. But it just wasn't flying with our thing. But again, going back to the effect it had on us with all these fans, to us it appeared as though it was working. So we said, okay, well, yeah, I guess we're headed in the right direction to be rock stars. You know, maybe we can do what we want later. Maybe.
And then after the release of QR2, based off my research and the rabbit holes I went down, things turned, a little bit dark for yourself. I understand a bit of a probably not such a great time of your life. But do you mind talking a bit about how things came to head ahead, especially between you and DeBrow?
Yeah, that was really the main problem in Quiet Riot was me and Kevin. And it's so unfortunate because later on in life, I learned, that I was kind of in the wrong on the whole deal. But um, what it started with, well, prior to getting Kevin in the band, which I found Kevin, I'm the one that found this guy. And I ran things, for me and Randy. We were in, previous bands. We had several. We were playing keggers, which are just surfer parties with a bunch of beer and drunk people in somebody's backyard. And of course, the police always show up too to have a good time. And I was always the one in charge. Well, once Kevin was there, he was in charge. But also, Kevin, and I don't blame him, but Kevin really, really adored Randy. He just loved Randy. And he was really kind of, from my point of view, I was like, well, this guy's stealing my best friend because he was always like, Randy, let's go here. Let's go and, do this. You know, uh, he was like stealing my best friend. So I had a lot of resentment on that level. Plus, anything I said in the band, like, oh, we should do this. No, we're not doing that. Kevin immediately discounted it. So that the friction that was occurring between us was just something that built up into a head. I did start drinking quite a bit. I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with certainly we weren't making any progress. We did first. We could still fill up a club full of kids and have a great audience, and it looked great, but nobody was really biting on it on a big time level to where you felt like you were going to be some kind of a rock star. In fact, it got to the point where you said, well, I'm going to be like my age now, 68 years old, and I'm still going to be playing at the Starwood, um, which I couldn't do because it's not there anymore. But they would have found somewhere else. But yeah, it created a lot of friction. And then it caused problems between me and Randy because I was pushing to get rid of Kevin. I never wanted him in the band anyway. I had no belief in this guy. He had no experience. Me and Randy had already played clubs on the Sunset Strip um, when we met Kevin with a different band, and Kevin had never played anywhere. And so I'm like, why is this guy coming in here, and telling everybody what to do and all this, and this is all getting really out of hand. And I was just miserable. I was not happy. I was getting music was putting a really, really horrible taste in my mouth. And it came to a head with a little brawl between me and Randy, which wasn't an uncommon thing. I mean, best friends. I'm sure when you were young and you had your best friend, you got in a beef, you rolled around on the ground, you and both ended up with red faces and crying and running home to your mothers. And that's basically what happened. Although it was a pretty significant brawl that ended up with me getting arrested and charged with a felony and a DUI, actually. But at that point, the management said, Kelly's out of control. He's out of here. See you later. And I was kicked out of the band. Um, all these years later, I still say that's the best thing that ever happened to me because I didn't feel that the band was going anywhere. And I took probably one of the hardest left turns anybody's ever taken in their life. And 3 days out of the band, I cut off all my hair. I enrolled in a paramedic school and I ran ambulance calls in LA for the next 10 years.
Yeah, quite a change of career and pace, though. Obviously, working in that kind of line of work, there's probably a lot of
Yeah,
yeah, urgency and wildness going on.
I didn't feel like I was living life anymore in Quiet Riot. It was, again, going back to the word robot, it felt like we were a bunch of robots. And so, it wasn't exciting to me anymore. And it was just dull and repetitious and pointless. And I had always done music my whole life up to that point. I was 20 years old. I played with Randy for 9 years, longer than anybody ever did. And, it was time for a change. And I said, I want to see what's going on in the rest of the world. And I had always had a desire to be a fireman. Got the hiccups. Um, so a fireman told me the best thing I could do is go out and start on an ambulance and then try to get on the fire department. So that's what I did. And, you know, it turned out I really, really loved working ambulance. I loved it. And it was a great life. And the interesting thing about it was for me was that, unlike the rest of my life, was that uh, uh, nobody knew I was in a band. Those kind of people didn't go to rock clubs and see bands, and so nobody knew, and I never brought it up. So I was very anonymous in it, and I just did my job and tried to do it as best I could, um, and I loved it, and I felt that it was the best thing and the thing that I really needed.
After going through such a long period of frustration, yes, it would have been awesome to have something so fulfilling come
Yeah.
into your life after that. But it was
Oh,
also
sure.
fairly soon after the release of that the QR2 record that Randy got picked up by another artist.
Right. He was equally frustrated, but he wasn't frustrated enough to listen to me and say, we need to get Kevin out of here. You got to remember, these are two guys who wanted Alice Cooper or David Bowie or something weird and screwed up, not some guy that looks like a chia pet and, and can't sing as far as I was concerned. Um, Having said that, I will say I think Kevin became one of the greatest rock singers ever, but that took quite a while to get there. And leaving the band, I took with me my hatred for Kevin. I despised him. The drummer, he never really made it with me anyway, and he was always on Kevin's side, so enemy. But Randy and I still remain friends, and that was the the good, the silver lining of the situation.
I was, yeah, going to ask how long it took you guys to uh, mend the fences, as it were, especially as what I was alluding to before, then getting picked up and working with Ozzy Osbourne. I mean, that must have been something, quite interesting from your perspective to see literally from the sidelines.
I think what happened was, I mean, first of all, after the fight, uh, and after I got out of jail the next day, I I called up Randy and I said, "Whoa, dude, shoo, that was a bad one, huh?" And he was like, "Yeah, we were laughing about the whole thing. He thought it was funny. I got thrown in jail. I kind of did, but but anyway, Randy and I had been thrown in jail more than a couple times in our time together. So getting thrown in jail was, you know, is like something that we had dealt with throughout our life. Um, but I think the fact that I left and pursued something else, I think maybe that served as a little hint to Randy that this wasn't working and maybe it was time for him to move on too. Now, many, many, many years later, after Kevin and I kissed and made up and became, well, Kevin became one of the closest friends I've ever had besides Randy. And we would have lunch several times a week. We'd go out to dinner. He lived about a mile from me. He had moved up here to Las Vegas. And he said something to me one day that I couldn't believe came out of Kevin Dubrov's mouth, his very famous mouth of saying not so great things. But he said to me over lunch, he said, he said, after you left, he goes, Randy just didn't feel the same. He wasn't happy anymore. And, I figured Randy would be just fine without me because they did get Rudy, who's a good bass player, very good bass player. And he's great looking and he looked better on stage than I did. And, but that wasn't enough for Randy. And I don't want to be, I don't want to say, oh, he missed me. He couldn't do it without me. That's not what happened because he went on to work very closely with other people. And well, he should have. He really needed to expand the little box that Quiet Riot was. And that's what it was. It was a box, and we couldn't escape it. But I kicked through one of the walls, did some damage, got in trouble. Maybe it served as sort of an example that there is life behind the box or after the box.
And through all the good times and the bads, a lot of reflecting to be done, and you've got the stories to tell, and that's
Yep.
exactly what these shows coming up are all about. Caligani, I'd like to, yeah, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with me today. I have a feeling that I could keep talking to you for, days, weeks, months, years. But what I can guarantee is that there's going to be a good hour and a half of additional conversation for you from these shows.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Q&As are going to be amazing. Again, having Scott with me is going to be a great thing. And again, there may be a special guest that can't mention any names, but the guy does live in Australia, and that's convenient. It's a health concern as far as his availability. But if I get that, that is really going to be something that shows, and people will be able to see in Australia only uh, the real things behind Randy that made him who he was.
No doubt going to be absolutely amazing. Looking forward to it at the end of the year, and we'll see you in Australia.
It's my pleasure, man.